My name is Abby Johnson, and today I'm going to ask you to think about something that might be a little weird. I want you to take a second and think about your body. Are you happy with it? How does it compare with society's idea of the perfect body? Almost everyone would say that they aren't happy with their body and that it doesn't meet society's standards. In a survey of 185 college students, 58% of them felt pressure to be a certain weight. Coupled with other factors, this kind of pressure can lead to the development of very dangerous disorders. For the next 24 minutes, I hope to inform you about the different kinds of disorders, how they affect people, and how someone suffering can get help. But first, what different kinds of eating disorders are there? Lisa Sheffert of the CMU Counseling Center chatted with me in the hopes of spreading awareness.
I really shy away from the labels because there's all different variations. Sometimes there's binging, sometimes there's binging with purging, sometimes there's binging and purging and restricting. Sometimes there's a lot of excessive exercise. So the person's eating habits really don't look that unhealthy, but they're exercising excessively or using laxatives. So the labels can be helpful, but it's also not really important from my perspective to give a specific diagnosis. What's important is to look at what are the symptoms, where is their health? Are they in danger of passing out? Are they having heart arrhythmia? Are they purging and throwing up blood?
Lisa Carpenter from Center of Hope Counseling for Eating Disorder Treatment was also gracious enough to sit down with me.
A lot of people have what's considered eating disorders not otherwise specified, or actually now what's called other specialized feeding and eating disorders. And what that is that many people with eating disorders have a mixture of symptomologies, so maybe they don't have quite enough to meet the diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa, or quite enough to meet the diagnostic criteria for bulimia, but they have symptoms of either both or almost enough to be diagnosed. So that is a very popular one that I see a lot of, is the one that falls under that category.
Often when we treat people with eating disorders, there are comorbid is the term, which I've never really cared for, but co-occurring eating disorders that co-occur, the disorder co-occurs with another disorder, so like substance abuse or depression. Those are kind of the top two, and also sexual abuse, particularly past childhood sexual abuse. Those are fairly common. Also sometimes OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, perfectionism traits. We often see some of that as well. I worked with many students and adults who also had depression as their main concern, or some other identified main issue that they wanted to work on, but they did, turns out, also have a lot of eating concerns and eating disorder issues. So maybe that wasn't their main diagnosis.
In fact, according to ANAD.org, almost 50% of people with eating disorders meet the criteria for depression.
It's almost never just a real clear cut. There's nothing simple about eating disorders.
Having worked with eating disorders for years, the counselors have seen great health risks arise for some of those affected.
The major risks are physical. I mean, those are the ones that we're most concerned about when a student comes in, because we want to make sure that they're not engaging in behaviors that could result in some permanent damage. One of the things that we look for, if a female student is not having their menstrual cycle anymore, and if that happens for a long period of time, they can get to the point where they can no longer have children. So that would be a long-term problem. They also could have osteoporosis if they are not getting enough nutrients, and again, that can be both short-term and long-term problems. If a person's purging a lot, they can have their tooth enamel can get worn away, and that can be a real problem. Passing out, and certainly heart arrhythmia, and quite frankly, leading to death. I mean, people do have heart attacks from complications of, quite frankly, starving themselves to death. So, there's a lot of physical complications that we are really screening for and trying to make sure that when students come in, that their physical health, their immediate physical health is not in danger. Then we also talk to them about long-term physical health. Of course, the whole treatment is about their emotional health. So we're talking with them about being happy and taking steps to like themselves and working on self-esteem and all that sort of thing. So that's always a part of the picture. I wouldn't say that there's anything about an eating disorder that would have any sort of long-term irreversible effects on emotional health. People can always get better.
Knowing the symptoms can be the first step in recognizing the disorder, whether it's within ourselves or a loved one.
It's not just about eating. Often, the more important questions for us to ask are things like, have you been cutting back on socializing with people? Are you more irritable? Are you not eating with people? Have you been changing your habits as far as who you'll eat with, when you'll eat? So a lot of times it's behaviors that don't necessarily attach themselves to specifically how much the person is eating. Certainly we do see changes in the amount that the person is eating, or if they're purging, or that sort of thing. So we certainly are looking for specifically just those signs. But a lot of the signs and symptoms don't really have anything to do with food. They have to do with self-esteem and control and kind of isolating from other people because other people are noticing that something's going on.
As the eating disorder takes over and grows, if you will, you see an increase of anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive, and all that can lead to then like dropping out of classes. Sometimes you see suicide. So there's quite a few psychological things that can end up creating huge problems in someone's life. Also, you see hoarding and stealing food, and also, like I said, that rigid and obsessing over exercise, regardless of weather or injury. And then also another thing that you would notice would be running to the bathroom after eating. Eating disorders are such a complex disorder because not only you're looking at the psychological thing, but you're also looking at the medical aspect and the nutritional aspect, and it makes it a very complicated disorder to treat, which then means that you're looking at more treatment or a longer-term treatment.
Being educated on the facts and the myths surrounding eating disorders is extremely important. Stay tuned, because up next, we're going to hear from some of those loved ones about their personal experiences with disorders.
Hello, I'm Joe.
My name is Alex.
My name's Donna.
My name is Austin Cavender.
And my name is Abby. Earlier, we discussed a multitude of ways in which people experience eating disorders. Now, we're going to hear some real-life experiences from people who've been affected, including some common stereotypes and ways that we as a society can combat them.
A long time ago, I used to believe that an eating disorder was just something that somebody did to get attention.
Yeah, I thought that people who had an eating disorder had a tough upbringing. Something dramatic or tragic happened in their life and it changed them, and this is how they dealt with it. That is totally incorrect.
In fact, according to the National Eating Disorder Association, 20 million women and 10 million men suffer from a clinically significant eating disorder at some time in their life.
I had an eating disorder. I suffered from anorexia and body dysmorphic disorder, and I went through it for about 10 years. It affected me mentally in a way where I couldn't think straight. My logic was all off. It was very sporadic. My grades suffered, and when I went to treatment, I had to relearn how to think, pretty much. I was always tired. I was really sluggish. I would shake a lot. I was really, really weak.
When I was severely underweight, I was always cold and really crabby all the time. I never wanted to do anything fun. I didn't want to go out with friends, or I don't know, I just didn't have the energy, wasn't in the mood.
Most people think that eating disorder is all about food and wanting to be skinny, when it actually isn't. It's about control. People usually think like, oh, she's not eating because she thinks she's fat, and no, that's not the case. It's maybe there's other things affecting it, like her parents don't listen to her and she tries her best, but she doesn't feel she's good enough, or his coach is telling him he's doing this wrong and that wrong, and he would think like, oh, maybe if I do this perfect, then this will be better.
I saw the positive reaction that I got when I did lose the weight, and it became an obsessive thing. It became like the last thing in my life that I had some control over was what I ate and the calories that I counted. I needed to be able to control what I could control, and I was very good at controlling what I consumed. I was very good at counting calories and making sure that even if I had 3 extra calories that day, that was not okay. I was going to go work out and work off those 3 extra calories. This need for control, it's very natural. But sometimes it can get out of hand, you know? And especially when you're a teenager, you don't have control over anything that happens to you. You can't get control from school, you can't get it from home, you can't get it from your family, you can't get it from your friends. So I think that it's a very natural reaction to want to limit your intake, or to at least monitor your intake, you know, very closely, and to make sure, like, okay, I can only eat 1,000 calories today. Okay, today I'm gonna go for 400 calories, you know, because then I'll feel good about myself. I'll feel like I didn't screw up.
I think if you look at each case of an eating disorder individually, most people will say, like, why do you hate yourself? And it's not usually because I'm fat. It's usually, if you actually sit down and talk with them, it's saying, well, I felt the need that I needed to be perfect, or I needed to do this and no one liked me, I was bullied. It's usually a waterfall effect that leads into eating, instead of just assuming if you actually sat down and talked to somebody. People need to know that it's not about weight, and it's not about numbers. For instance, when I went to treatment, it was a weight-based treatment program, so you had to be severely underweight to go. They didn't look at your mental state. They looked at the number on the scale. So I think people need to understand that a girl could look perfectly fine, but she throws up after every meal that she has.
A lot of people think that once you go to get help, that's it, you know, you're cured. It's not a one and done kind of thing. Sometimes it could take years to recover. It's not something that you get over like that. My parents would ask me to be honest, and they would say, have you thrown up recently? And I would be honest, I would tell them yes. Yeah, last week I threw up. They would get sad. They would be like, I thought you were going to treatment. I thought you were working on it. And it's like, I am working on it, but it doesn't go away overnight. While the majority of people that experience eating disorders are female, men can and do go through the same ordeal.
Growing up, I was always a kid who was heavier set. All through middle school and high school, I was just constantly gaining weight and getting bullied for it. And by my senior year, I had peaked out at about 300 pounds. At the time, in high school, I was dating somebody all 4 years, and then I moved up here to Central for my freshman year. And during that year, my girlfriend at the time, we broke up, and the depression kind of got to me, and I stopped eating, kind of altogether. Then when the surgery happened, that was the biggest eye-opener for me, is that, hey, maybe what I'm doing isn't right and not healthy if the people who work at a hospital are telling me that it's not right and not healthy. Waking up and just like getting ready for the day was probably one of the hardest things. Every morning I would wake up and try to get ready to take a shower, but just getting up in the morning and trying to stand up was nearly impossible. And I think this was, if I recall from what I was told over the summer, was just a vitamin deficiency. I had no nutrition going into my body, but I had a lot of waste leaving my body, so it was just my body was slowly eating itself.
An estimated 10 to 15% of people with anorexia or bulimia are male, and eating disorder rates are significantly higher among athletes. Men are also much less likely to seek help due to the perception that this is a woman's disease.
I never really thought that, this could happen to guys, or it would, and you would see, you do see a lot when it comes to eating disorders with women, that people are there to help them, and there's all these organizations and everything to help, but when it happened to me, all I was getting was positive reinforcement for my weight loss. And I'm not putting the blame on anybody because no one really knew what I was doing. I feel like because of being male, that's not really the first thing on people's minds when they see the rapid weight loss. They don't think, oh, he's going through an eating disorder, because it can't happen to him. And even though I did have close friends who knew that I wasn't eating right or working out, they would still just give me positive reinforcement about losing weight and everything. And, just having all that positive coming into my life, through my one negative outlet of not eating, it justified it. And I feel like maybe if someone was there to sympathize with me, or someone was there to say, hey, this can happen and it is happening to you, then maybe things would have been a little different.
Giving a personal testimony can be difficult, but it's important to know that no one is ever alone while going through an ordeal like an eating disorder. We're about to hear a few different ways that people who have gone through things like Austin or Alex can get help, so stay tuned through the short break. My name is Abby Johnson, and we just heard some personal testimonies from people who've experienced eating disorders and some of the different ways people develop and are affected by these disorders. As we heard, the effects of some disorders can be extremely long-lasting and hard to recover from. We are about to hear a few different reasons why these disorders might originally develop and how those affected can get help.
One of the questions that I've often asked myself, quite frankly, in our culture is, why don't young women and men get eating disorders? Because we have this really odd dichotomy where we are so focused on thinness and beauty and body image, and yet we have a culture of excess. So there's a lot of binge type mentality in not just food, but all kinds of different behaviors in our culture. Plus we also have, like I said, this concentration on the media and being thin, and the thinner you are, the more beautiful you are, the more successful you are, et cetera, et cetera. So that has a huge impact on it. I think that a lot of it is media driven, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is unfortunately incredibly rewarding, and you can be very successful very quickly if you're trying to lose weight and you restrict yourself and you stand on the scale and you see the numbers go down. I mean, it is unfortunately from that standpoint. And also, friends will say, hey, you look like you've lost weight, you look great. I mean, originally, when a person starts dieting and restricting, they get a lot of positive feedback. So that in and of itself can be very rewarding, and then of course they feel like they want to keep doing that.
Going from being someone who had been bullied for years and been conditioned to think that, I don't look good, or I don't, nothing I do is good enough, and no matter what, I'm just going to be that fat kid who gets picked on, to people started complimenting me about my looks. It's very different from what I'm used to, and I feel like in a sense it did kind of make me crave it more, because the results were quick and they were good compared to being someone who was big for most of their life to now, I found a way that I can actually make myself normal sized and people notice and people like me for it. And I think that definitely the going from being loved in a relationship to not having that, relationship, and then getting the recognition and the love from a lot of people, it definitely, I would say, it fueled my bad eating habits.
I think that what helped me a lot was realizing that, I was going through a lot. I had generalized anxiety disorder and severe depression. Getting help for those symptoms really helped me kick the eating habits. The eating problems stemmed from the depression and the anxiety, so fixing that helped me kick the eating issues a lot more effectively.
I tell people there's not a lot of eating disorder therapists out there, and a person is more likely to have solid recovery if they get treatment with someone who's specialized. Any kind of counseling would be, I think, better than nothing, but getting someone who's specialized is very important. And that specialized person should know that it's important to have a treatment team that includes a dietitian that can work with the nutritional part of the disorder, and not just a dietitian, but someone who works with eating disorders and knows the psychological end of it, and then also with a medical doctor. And effective treatment means that those team members are going to sit down and talk on a regular basis about these clients to make sure that everything is moving in the same direction. So that's a really important part and aspect of the recovery process, is having the treatment team. Group counseling is a great addition to individual counseling. We do groups here, and they're focused on skill building, but also experiential, which means that we're doing stuff, whether it be art therapy or expressive therapies, during that time that pull out issues that need to be addressed individually. And group counseling also is a great in addition to individual counseling, because what it does is it also gives these individuals other people to talk to about what's going on with them, because many people don't understand eating disorders. They just think it's about food. And one of the things I always tell people is it's always about the food, but really nothing about the food. If you have someone that understands that, then it feels pretty good for people to be able to have that support. So that's highly recommended for clients to participate in those group experiences. So there's the support groups, and then outpatient counseling. And outpatient counseling is very helpful especially with someone who has an onset eating disorder. But if you're talking about someone who's been eating disordered for several years maybe, then a higher level of care might be necessary, such as a day treatment program or a inpatient setting or a residential setting. A day treatment program would be where you go to a program that is throughout the day. And so they would start out with probably around breakfast time, and maybe they would have a group before breakfast, and then they would eat together, and then they would branch out and do groups throughout the day. And then they would have lunch together, and then after lunch they would do a meal processing, and then break out and meet with their individual therapists, and then do more groups, and they'll do that throughout the day. So it's a very structured program. If they get help right away, then it can be a shorter treatment experience, and with that I mean 6 months to a year, something like that. The longer the eating disorder continues to control them, the longer treatment will take. So it's very common that I'm working with college students from the time they enter college to the time they graduate.
I would definitely try to be there for them as much as possible. Even though, in my situation, it may not have helped me, I feel like positive reinforcement is needed. Not to the extent of keep complimenting them and telling them that they look good, but do let them know that they are beautiful and they're good. They're a good person just the way they are. They don't need to change themselves because society says that you need to be this certain size to look good, or but don't be overbearing at the same time. You don't want to coddle them and have them end up depending on you. This is kind of something that everyone needs to be able to have someone to lean on, but also they need to be able to support themselves at the same time. If you can, try to help them in the sense of getting professional help as well. There's tons of organizations, there's tons of outlets through hospitals and medical programs and medical professionals who know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. The same people who helped me could help anyone before the serious symptoms that happened to me can happen to them. And catching it before that, could prevent surgery, it could prevent even death. That's in certain cases, extreme cases.
Getting help is the most important aspect of any disorder, so I saved the best for last. I'm Abby Johnson, and thank you so much for listening. Remember, if you or a loved one is struggling with an eating disorder, go to www.nationaleatingdisorders.org to find help today. This has been a production of the School of Broadcast and Cinematic Arts at Central Michigan University.